Every generation inherits certain ideas about what it means to grow, evolve, and know yourself. In our age, one of the most widespread ideas is that the ego is the enemy. We hear it everywhere. Kill your ego. Ego is the root of all suffering. You can't awaken until you destroy it. It's a message repeated in self-help books, spiritual talks, and countless motivational videos. And on the surface, it makes sense. After all, most of us have seen how ego can lead to arrogance, selfishness, stubbornness, and conflict. We've all met people who can't admit they're wrong, who build their lives around appearances, who are enslaved by the need to be admired. If that's what ego is, then surely we're better off without it. But Carl Gustav Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, disagreed. In fact, he believed this idea, that the ego must be destroyed, is one of the most harmful misconceptions in modern psychology and spirituality. Because the truth is, the ego is not your enemy. It is not a parasite or a poison. It is a necessary part of being human. The ego is the structure that allows you to say, I am. Without it, you wouldn't know where you end and the world begins. You wouldn't be able to plan for the future, set goals, make choices, or even recognize yourself in the mirror. It is the center of consciousness, the storyteller of your life. The problem isn't the ego itself. The problem is what happens when the ego stops serving you and starts ruling you, when it forgets that it is only a part of you, not the whole of you. When it becomes so obsessed with control, status, and validation that it drowns out your deeper, authentic self. And this is why Jung's work is so powerful. He didn't teach people to destroy the ego. He taught them to master it. He believed that the goal of psychological growth is not to become egoless, but to form a conscious relationship with the ego, to educate it, integrate it, and align it with the deeper center of the psyche, which he called the self. Before we can master the ego, we have to understand what it really is. Carl Gustav Jung described the ego as the center of consciousness, the part of the psyche that organizes your thoughts, memories, and experiences into a coherent narrative. Think of it as the narrator of your inner story. It's the I that says, I want this, I believe that, I remember when. Without the ego, consciousness collapses. Imagine waking up tomorrow with no memory of who you are, no preferences, no sense of ownership over your life. That is what a life without ego would be. Not enlightenment, but disorientation. The ego also serves a critical evolutionary function. It draws boundaries between me and not me, allowing you to navigate the world. When you say, I am tired or I am in danger, you are using the ego to interpret internal and external signals. This is essential for survival. Even in relationships, the ego plays a vital role. It helps you say, this is my boundary, this is what I need, this is who I am. However, the ego was never meant to rule the psyche. It was meant to act as a mediator, a bridge between the conscious and unconscious, the external world and the internal reality. Its job is to serve the deeper self, the vast unconscious source of wisdom, creativity, and authenticity that lies beneath our awareness. Problems begin when the ego forgets this role, when it stops being a servant and tries to become the king. If the ego's natural role is to mediate and organize, how does it become corrupted? The answer lies in adaptation, and more importantly, over-adaptation. From early childhood, our sense of self is shaped by the environment. We learn what earns us love, attention, and safety, and what brings punishment, rejection, or shame. Maybe you were praised for being the smart one, or the helpful one. Maybe you were scolded for being too loud, too emotional, too sensitive. Without realizing it, your ego started building an identity around these messages. This process is not inherently bad. It's how we learn to live in society. But when the need for approval becomes the foundation of identity, the ego begins to inflate. It starts constructing a false self, a carefully curated version of you, designed to be accepted, admired, and loved. For example, imagine a child who is constantly told that crying is weak. Over time, they suppress their vulnerability and build an identity around being the strong one. As an adult, they might pride themselves on independence and resilience, but they also might struggle to connect emotionally or ask for help. The persona they built for survival has now become a prison. This is the essence of ego inflation. The ego, instead of acting as a channel for the deeper self, becomes obsessed with maintaining an image. It's no longer concerned with truth, only with appearances, and the more that image is rewarded through praise, money, status, or social media likes, the more addicted we become to it. Carl Gustav Jung described this process as one of the great psychological tragedies of modern life, because once the ego inflates, we stop living and start performing. We become actors playing roles, the achiever, the savior, the intellectual, the rebel. And yet beneath the applause, many of us feel empty, because we know, even if we can't admit it, that the person being loved is not the real I. At its extreme, ego inflation leads to a more dangerous condition, Jung called ego possession. This is when the ego stops being a part of you and becomes all of you. It's when you no longer have an ego. The ego has you. Ego possession is subtle and insidious. It often hides behind success. From the outside, a possessed person may look like they have everything: a powerful career, a perfect family, a glamorous life. But on the inside, they feel hollow. Every decision is calculated to protect an image. Every conversation is a performance. Every relationship is filtered through the question, how does this make me look? This condition is exhausting. Maintaining an image requires constant vigilance. You must always be on guard, monitoring how others see you, anticipating threats to your status, defending your reputation. And because the ego equates image with existence, any criticism feels like an existential threat. Even small failures feel catastrophic. Even minor rejection feels unbearable. Jung warned that in this state, the ego breaks its connection with the deeper self, the true center of the psyche. Without that connection, it loses its internal compass. Life becomes reactive. You lash out when criticized. You spiral when plans fail. You chase recognition as if your life depends on it, because to the ego it does. A simple metaphor captures this dynamic. Imagine an actor who has played a role for so long that they forget their real name. They speak the character's lines, wear the character's clothes, think the character's thoughts, and when someone criticizes the performance, they feel personally attacked. That's what ego possession is, total identification with a mask. Now that we understand how the ego can become inflated or even possess us, we need to look deeper beneath the surface of consciousness at one of Carl Gustav Jung's most important and challenging ideas: complexes. Jung believed that the psyche is not a single, unified whole. Instead, it is a living system composed of many parts, some conscious, others unconscious, all interacting with each other. Among these parts are what he called complexes, emotionally charged clusters of memories, beliefs, and experiences that form around significant life events, particularly those that involve pain, fear, or shame. A complex is like a splinter of your past that never fully healed. It remains lodged beneath the surface, quietly influencing your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And when something in the present moment touches that old wound, the complex springs to life, often with surprising intensity. Imagine, for example, someone who was humiliated in childhood whenever they made a mistake. Decades later, a minor criticism from a coworker might trigger an overwhelming reaction: anger, defensiveness, even rage. Consciously, they know the criticism isn't a big deal. But unconsciously, they're not reacting to the coworker at all. They're reacting to the echo of a childhood wound. This is the power of a complex. As Jung famously put it, we do not have complexes. Complexes have us. Complexes are not merely thoughts or habits. They are autonomous psychic entities with their own motivations and goals. They can hijack the ego and steer behavior in directions we neither intend nor understand. They can make us lash out at loved ones, sabotage opportunities, or retreat from life altogether, all while convincing us that we are choosing these actions. For instance, a rejection complex might cause someone to end relationships prematurely before the other person has a chance to leave them. Or an inferiority complex might lead to overachievement, not out of passion but out of a desperate need to prove worth. A power complex might push someone to dominate others because deep down they once felt powerless and helpless. Complexes explain why intelligent, rational people sometimes behave irrationally. They explain why we repeat painful patterns even when we know better. They reveal that much of what we call choice is, in fact, unconscious compulsion. The key to transformation is not to destroy these complexes. That is neither possible nor necessary. Instead, the work is to become conscious of them. When you recognize a complex in action, you create a space between stimulus and response, and in that space lies freedom, the freedom to choose differently. Complexes don't just influence how we react, they also shape how we act, or fail to act. One of the most devastating ways they do this is through self-sabotage. Self-sabotage is often misunderstood as laziness, lack of discipline, or low self-esteem. But at its core, It is a sophisticated psychological defense mechanism. The ego, shaped by past wounds and conditioned by fear, sees change, even positive change, as dangerous. Growth threatens the identity it has built, so it resists. Consider a man who spent his life believing he is not good enough. Even when he receives a promotion, part of him fears being exposed as a fraud. Instead of embracing the opportunity, he procrastinates, misses deadlines, or quits altogether. It's not incompetence, it's protection. The ego would rather sabotage success than risk confirming an old wound. Or imagine a woman who grew up in a household where love was conditional, given only when she pleased others. As an adult, she struggles to set boundaries. Every time she tries, guilt floods her system. The ego interprets boundary setting as a threat to love and belonging, so it sabotages her attempts with doubt, fear, and self-criticism. In both cases, self-sabotage is not a flaw. It is the ego's misguided attempt to keep the person safe. But in doing so, it prevents them from becoming who they truly are. Carl Gustav Jung wrote that the ego's primary goal is not happiness, it is survival. It will do anything to maintain the status quo, even if that status quo is painful. It confuses the familiar with the safe, and so it resists anything that challenges the identity it has spent years, even decades, constructing. The way out of this trap is not brute force or positive thinking, it is awareness. The moment you can recognize the impulse to sabotage as a defense, not a truth, you begin to reclaim your power. You can ask, what is this fear protecting me from? What belief is being threatened? In that moment of awareness, you are no longer controlled by the pattern, you are observing it. And observation is the first step toward transformation. To truly understand what it means to master the ego, we must go beyond the surface-level goal of ego control and step into one of Carl Gustav Jung's most profound ideas, individuation. Individuation is the lifelong psychological journey of becoming your true self, not the self shaped by conditioning, not the false identity constructed by the ego, but the deeper, authentic core that lies beneath all masks and roles. It is the process by which the conscious and unconscious parts of the psyche integrate into a harmonious whole. For Jung, individuation was not optional. It was the central task of human life, the reason we are here. Everything we go through, the challenges, the crises, the heartbreaks, the moments of awakening, they are all opportunities for the psyche to grow toward wholeness. But individuation is not an easy journey. It requires dismantling illusions, confronting inner contradictions, and integrating what we have rejected or denied about ourselves. It requires us to meet our shadow, the hidden parts of our psyche that contain both our most shameful impulses and our greatest untapped potential. And here's the paradox. The ego, which once helped us build a stable identity, often becomes the biggest obstacle to individuation, because individuation demands openness, a willingness to grow beyond who we think we are, while the ego is addicted to certainty. It wants to know, who am I? And then cling to that answer forever. Think of individuation as a voyage across an ocean. The ego is the ship. It provides structure, direction, and safety. But the self, the totality of your psyche, is the ocean itself. If the ship refuses to leave the harbor, you never discover the vastness of who you could become. On the other hand, if the ship disintegrates mid-journey, you drown. The challenge is to keep the ship intact and allow it to sail into deeper waters. Real-world example. Imagine someone who has always defined themselves as the caretaker. They are the reliable one, the helper, the person who puts everyone else first. This role may have earned them love and approval, but it has also caused resentment, burnout, and a lack of self-worth. Individuation asks them to confront the shadow of this identity, the anger, the unmet needs, the suppressed desires, and integrate them. Doing so doesn't mean they stop caring for others, it means they begin to care for themselves too, and their relationships become more authentic as a result. This is what individuation looks like in practice, not becoming someone new, but becoming more of who you are, more complete, more balanced, more real, and the ego, when properly trained, becomes the tool that allows this transformation to unfold. It stops clinging to a single identity and instead becomes flexible, adaptive, and open to evolution. Carl Gustav Jung believed that ego mastery unfolds in 3 fundamental stages, and each stage represents a deeper level of awareness and psychological freedom. These stages are not a linear checklist, but a cyclical, lifelong process. You will revisit them again and again as you evolve. Stage 1. Recognition, seeing the invisible. The first and most difficult step is recognizing that the ego is not in charge, at least not in the way we think. This is the wake-up moment, when you begin to notice how many of your decisions are driven by fear, how many of your beliefs are inherited, and how many of your reactions are automatic responses to past wounds rather than present realities. This stage requires brutal honesty. It means admitting that your anger might be covering up insecurity, that your ambition might be a response to childhood inadequacy, that your people-pleasing might be a strategy for avoiding rejection. One powerful exercise at this stage is to ask yourself, who is making this decision? My conscious self or a trauma pattern? For example, are you pursuing a certain career because it truly fulfills you, or because you want to prove your worth to someone from your past? Are you avoiding intimacy because you value independence, or because you fear being hurt again? Recognition is like turning on a light in a dark room. At first, the sight might be uncomfortable. You may see things you don't like, but once the light is on, you can begin to clean, rearrange, and reclaim the space. Stage 2, observation, the space between stimulus and response. Once you've recognized the ego's influence, the next step is learning to observe it without identifying with it. This is where real transformation begins. Instead of saying, I am angry, you say, anger is arising within me. Instead of, I am worthless, you say, a thought of worthlessness is appearing. This subtle linguistic shift reflects a deeper psychological truth. You are not your thoughts, feelings, or reactions. You are the consciousness that observes them. This is what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold awareness of both the ego and the unconscious simultaneously, without merging with either. It is the practice of watching the watcher. A practical metaphor. Imagine you are sitting in a theater, watching a movie. The film might be intense, full of emotion, drama, conflict. But as long as you remember that you are the observer, not the character on the screen, you maintain perspective. The moment you forget and believe you are the character, you are lost in the story. Observation builds emotional resilience. It allows you to pause before reacting. It gives you space to choose a response, instead of being swept away by a reflex. It transforms I am jealous into jealousy is present, and I can explore why. That small space is the difference between unconscious reactivity and conscious action. Stage 3, integration, from tyrant to servant. The final stage of ego mastery is integration, aligning the ego with the self and placing it in its proper role. At this level, the ego is no longer a tyrant trying to control everything, nor is it an enemy to be destroyed. It becomes a faithful ally, a bridge between your inner truth and the outer world. An integrated ego is flexible. It can adapt without losing its center. It can accept criticism without collapsing. It can admit mistakes without spiraling into shame. It understands that its value is not determined by external validation, but by its connection to the deeper self. One of the hallmarks of integration is the ability to hold paradoxes without falling apart. You can be strong and vulnerable, confident and uncertain, ambitious and content. The ego no longer needs to define itself in absolute terms because it no longer fears disintegration. Real-life example. Consider a leader who has mastered their ego. They no longer need to dominate to feel powerful. They listen as much as they speak. They delegate authority rather than hoard it. Their decisions are guided not by the need to appear in control, but by the deeper values they serve. This is ego in service to something greater, and it is the foundation of genuine leadership, creativity, and authenticity. We live in a culture that worships external authority, followers, titles, achievements, wealth. But as Carl Gustav Jung observed, none of these guarantee authentic authority. Real authority does not come from what you have, it comes from who you are. Authentic authority is the natural byproduct of an ego aligned with the self. It is a quiet, unshakable presence that needs no defense, no performance, no validation. It cannot be faked, and it cannot be taken away. Think of a mountain. It does not shout to prove its strength. It does not demand recognition. It simply is, steady, grounded, immovable. That is authentic authority. It is not loud. It is not aggressive. It is simply felt. A person with authentic authority doesn't crumble when criticized, because their worth isn't dependent on others' opinions. They don't cling to titles or possessions because their identity isn't anchored in external things. They are not desperate for approval because they already approve of themselves. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop trying to be powerful, you become powerful. When you stop trying to be loved, love flows more freely. When you stop chasing validation, respect follows naturally. This is the ultimate gift of ego mastery. The more you release the ego's desperate grip on image, control, and recognition, the more you embody the qualities you were chasing all along. You become grounded, calm, confident, and present. not because you're trying to be, but because you are simply aligned with who you truly are. We began this journey with a simple but profound question: what is the ego? And perhaps, as you've seen, the answer is not simple at all. The ego is not a monster to be slain, nor a flaw to be eradicated. It is not your enemy, it is your ally, or at least it can be, if you learn how to work with it. It is the bridge between your inner world and the outer one. It is the voice that says, I am. And when properly aligned, it becomes the voice that whispers, I am enough. But when the ego forgets its place, when it clings to masks and performances, it becomes a prison. It builds walls where there should be windows. It trades authenticity for approval, truth for validation, and wholeness for safety. And that is when we suffer, not because the ego is evil, but because we have forgotten that it is not the whole of who we are. Carl Gustav Jung taught us that the path to transformation is not about destroying the ego, but about educating it, refining it, and reconnecting it to the deeper self, the vast, timeless part of you that does not need to prove anything, because it simply is. This journey from possession to awareness, from illusion to authenticity, from tyranny to service, is the heart of psychological growth. And it is not a journey you complete once. It is a path you walk again and again, every day, in every choice, in every moment you choose truth over image, presence over performance, depth over distraction. The reward is extraordinary. When the ego bows to the self, you stop living for appearances and start living from essence. You stop chasing validation and start embodying worth. You stop performing a life and begin living one. And that life, the one that is waiting for you beyond fear, beyond masks, beyond the need to be anything other than who you are, that is the life you were born for. If this journey resonated with you, don't let it end here. Psychological growth isn't something we listen to, it's something we live. So here's what I want you to do next. Reflect. Take a moment after this video and ask yourself, where is my ego serving me, and where is it sabotaging me? Awareness is always the first step. Observe. In the coming days, watch your reactions closely. Notice when you feel triggered, defensive, or desperate for validation. That's your unconscious calling for attention. Integrate. Each time you become aware of a pattern, pause, breathe, choose differently, even if only slightly. Transformation is built on thousands of small conscious choices. And if you want to continue exploring the depths of psychology, philosophy, and self-mastery, if you want to go deeper into the works of Carl Gustav Jung and learn how to integrate these insights into your daily life, then subscribe to this channel. Join a growing community of seekers who, like you, are no longer satisfied with surface-level advice. People who want to understand themselves deeply, live authentically, and reclaim their inner power. This isn't the end of your journey, it's the beginning. Thank you for walking this path with me, and remember, your ego is not your enemy, it is the door. And on the other side of that door is the life you were always meant to live.